Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Kent Mitchell. I'm the Director of State Affairs for the National Head Start Association. On behalf of NHSA, welcome to this panel, Leveraging the Moment, Closing the Digital Divide. So excited because this is a relatively new topic for us at our leadership institutes. And we have an amazing group to illuminate the issue for us and help guide us forward, including, so excited, the acting chairwoman of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel, who we will get to into a Q&A with very shortly. Before we do, I do want to go ahead and present a little background information just to ground us all in this issue and how it relates to our community. So we'll spend a little bit of time doing that and dig right into our panel. So, the digital divide, I think, as a concept, we're going to dig into with our group, including the acting chairwoman, but I wanted to provide you some statistics on it that I think speak to how it relates to the Head Start community. So first thing is that the divide is very much based on income. It shouldn't surprise you that the digital divide is very much driven by income. 92% of families with an income of $75,000 or more have broadband access at home, compared to just 57% of families with an income of less than $30,000. So a very stark divide for the families that we serve. There's a racial and ethnic dimensions to the digital divide as well, obviously very much correlated with socioeconomic status in our country as well. But 80% of white Americans have access to broadband at home, compared to 71% of Black Americans and 65% of Hispanic Americans. 25% of the population in rural areas lack access to broadband service. And this is a dimension of the divide that was new to me, and you may or may not know it, but about a quarter of adults report that they have a smartphone, but they don't have broadband internet at home. So that leaves them at a disadvantage in this digital age and digital world as well. So the divide is pervasive. This information is from the Pew Research Center and gives you a sense, again, of the socioeconomic dimensions of the digital divide and how that relates to everything from smartphone access to desktops to broadband to even tablet computers as well. So Head Start, though, can play a critical role. That's what we're going to explore today with all three of our speakers. And this is an amazing thing. So RAND did a study, the RAND Institute, a very well-respected organization in Washington. And there were three groups of people that parents seeking technology advice really trusted: pediatricians, family members, and you guessed it, early childhood teachers. So you have a really critical role to play if you're in the classroom or you lead a program. Digital inclusion and equity, we're all about equity in Head Start. That's our lifeblood, that's our mission. A few things, equity roles for Head Start: expanding device access. You may or may not already do that. Digital literacy, including security and privacy online. And also, this is critical, age-appropriate use of technology. We're talking about preschoolers here, in some cases toddlers. We want to know that parents are armed with best practices there and encouraging age-appropriate use of technology. Children will benefit if we close the digital divide. I think it's really clear how families will benefit, but to focus on the issues with children, the American Pediatrics Association found higher self-efficacy in math and science for low-income children who had early access to technology. And we know digital readiness gaps emerge before kindergarten. So just a few reasons and some data to ground us in the conversation today. But we're going to learn from experts today, including the acting chairwoman of the SEC, Jessica Rosenworcel. So I'd like to take a minute to introduce her here, and then we'll get into our Q&A. And please, in the chat, give her a warm Head Start welcome, because she is a new face to our audience here. But the acting chairwoman believes that the future belongs to the connected. She works to promote greater opportunity, accessibility, and affordability in our communication services in order to ensure all Americans get a fair shot at 21st century success. Very important for this audience, she's been responsible for developing policies to help expand the reach of broadband to schools, libraries, hospitals, and households all across the country. She has a really strong policy background, as you can see from the slide here, on Capitol Hill, and she lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and two children. Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel, welcome today to the Head Start community.
Thank you so much. It's a treat to be here. And as you said, I'm new to the Head Start community, though a fan from afar. And I'm really excited about being able to spend a little time with you today.
Great. So let's dig right into our Q&A. I'm excited to hear from you. So you are a new face. So, we're very relational in early childhood. So we'd love to just learn more about you, about your background, your passion. How did you come to this role, and why do you care so much about the digital divide and education and these issues in our society?
Yeah. I did some remarks a little while ago at a university, so older kids, and someone asked, since you were very young, have you wanted to be an FCC commissioner? And I was like, absolutely not. It's not the thing that was probably on my radar. But I found myself in Washington. I worked in the private sector, then joined the FCC as staff, and then spent some time on Capitol Hill. And when I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked for Senator Jay Rockefeller, who represented the state of West Virginia, and deeply impressed upon me that there are communities that are overlooked and left behind, and that we had responsibilities. And he also was the author of a program that's known as E-Rate, which is the nation's largest educational technology program, which is overseen by the Federal Communications Commission. And so I learned a lot about how we were getting technology out to schools and libraries across the country, and how we could use that program to remedy some gaps that we were seeing, where rural areas didn't have as much service as urban areas, and where low-income schools didn't have the same level of service as more well-off suburban schools. And so I came to the FCC, and one of the first things I did was I tried to explore how that E-Rate program worked around the country, back in the days when we would travel and not only meet over video like this. And one of my trips was to the Coachella Valley in California, which most people know because they think of the big music festival, but I was not visiting it for the big music festival. I visited it because there was a school there that was getting really creative with how to connect with students. And the students in the Coachella Valley, a lot of them are low-income families. Their parents are migrant farm workers, and they live in really unassuming trailer homes adjacent to the fields. And the superintendent of the school that had relied on money told me that even when he made efforts to get devices into the hands of all those students, they'd go home and they wouldn't have the connectivity to do their nightly schoolwork. I started calling that lack of, that inability to do work at home, the homework gap, to make apparent that we're going to need to connect all those students. But this was like one of those creative and inspired individuals I met. And what he did was he outfitted the school buses in this community with Wi-Fi, because a lot of these kids, spend an hour coming into school, an hour coming back, and he turned that ride time into connected time for homework, which was amazing. But then he did something one further. He just parked those school buses for hours on end in those trailer home communities, because he said he was able to get the students where they live and bring their families along. And that really stayed with me, which was that we have to connect everyone everywhere. And we might need scrappy solutions like that, but we should look at the programs we have and how we can do it. And it's not strictly about connecting the child for school. It's about how do we bring along the family at the same time. And so those things have really influenced me when I think about these issues at the FCC.
Thank you so much for illuminating. It really helps to understand where you come from and are coming from. And you're speaking the language of Head Start. You may or may not know that we have a migrant and seasonal Head Start program that serves right over 60,000 kids across the country every year, and are specifically tailored to the needs of migrant children and families, and seasonal children and families. So that's a really, you may or may not have known that.
I did not plan this, I swear. But
that's amazing.
Communities that get overlooked, and there's so much potential there. It's terrific when you can figure out how to tap into it.
And so that's what the divide is all about, right? So maybe you could tell us, how do you define the digital divide? And because our audience, we mainly deal with families with low incomes and other risk factors, tell us about digital equity and digital inclusion, these terms that we hear floating about.
Definitions, here we go. I think we talk very casually about the digital divide, but this pandemic has exposed it more than anything else, right? Because as a nation, we're told to mask up, hunker down, go online for school, for work, for healthcare.
Yeah.
And we've recognized not everyone can get there. And one of the things this pandemic has done is it's offered some nuance in our thinking about the digital divide. Because for many years, we just spoke about it like it was strictly about rural communities that didn't have the infrastructure for high-speed internet to reach every home. But we've come to recognize there's this other problem, which is affordability. And affordability can affect rural America, urban America, everything in between. And we are now building programs to address affordability. So when I think of the digital divide, I think of those two components, deployment and affordability. We have to solve both. And when I think about digital equity, I think it's pretty easy to just say, you don't have a fair shot at success in the 21st century if you don't have high-speed internet access at home that is reliable, affordable, and consistent. I believe that deep in my bones, and I don't think we can stop in this country till we get 100% of us to have broadband available, affordable, reliable at home. And then when you mention digital inclusion, what I can say is that's really incumbent on all of us who have roles of any kind of authority to think about how people are going to access what you put out there in the world and what you put online. Let me give you an example of that. I think in general, we should build government programs so that they're mobile first. And by that, I mean, take note of the statistic you mentioned at the start. With Latinx households, they over-index on smartphone accessibility for the internet, but under-index on traditional wired high-speed broadband at home. So if you got to apply for a program, register for school, for education, for some government service, let's make sure that that application is optimized for a mobile phone. We've got to meet people where they are. And to me, that's what digital inclusion is about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And 70% of the families that Head Start serves are either Black or Latinx. And so I wanted to give you that context too, and appreciate your comments on inclusion and equity there. You talked about in that Coachella example, and I'll never think of it the same way now. It's not just the music festival. So that it really, they brought it to the family because the benefits to families are so important. And Head Start is a whole child, whole family intervention. It's meant to break poverty, and parents are as important as children in terms of the kind of the delivery structure there. So when you think about some of the benefits to families of connectedness, particularly as it, I guess, works through educational institutions that are really for children, how does that work? And what are some of the outcomes you would like to see happen there for the family?
Yeah, so we have this new program that the FCC started, and we'll get to it probably in more detail later. It's the nation's largest ever broadband affordability program. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it is designed for low-income households to help them get online.
Yeah.
And when we were trying to promote it, we made an effort to promote it to Pell Grant recipients. And we worked with Secretary Cardona at the Department of Education to do so. Yeah, in fact, wrote an email to every single Pell Grant recipient in this country. There's like 6 million of them or something. Yeah. Anyway, and we asked the Department of Education to let us know about people you learned who took advantage of this program. And again, a story, and I'm not going to remember all the specifics, but we had this woman from northern Minnesota, and she had 4 kids, and she was a Pell Grant recipient. She was going to community college, and it was the height of the pandemic, and she had like limited data capped phone-based internet service, which she was parsing out to her 4 children so they could go to school online. And she would sometimes wake up early and drive to this parking lot so she could just use the Wi-Fi in the parking lot for her own education. Mm-hmm. And you just think about the logistics of that, the constraints, just managing a household with 4 kids during the pandemic, and with online school, and so many of them locked out of the virtual classroom because the bandwidth was exhausted. They didn't have any more data. So she was able to participate in this program. And it just, it gave her time back for her life. She wasn't driving to the parking lot in the school in the morning. Her kids could reliably get online, and they wouldn't have to worry about parsing it out and who would have access and who might not be able to go today. And it's amazing because we have that capacity to fix these problems. And so when you hear about them, they really break your heart. But I'm very proud of what the FCC is now doing to try to address broadband access and affordability in low-income households. And I think a lot of it's been directed at students for good reason, but you can see how the benefits really flow to the full family.
Absolutely. Well, let's take our questions a little bit out of order and ask more about the emergency broadband.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I know I can't stop. I'm so excited about it.
What does it do? Yeah, what does it do? How does it work?
We started it in May. We have $3.2 billion from Congress for what is the nation's largest ever broadband affordability effort. And it is a program that is available to a whole bunch of low-income households. You don't need to qualify multiple ways. You can qualify because you have low income at 135% of the federal poverty level. You participate in SNAP, Medicaid, Lifeline. You get a Pell Grant. You have a student in a free or reduced lunch program at school. You demonstrate you just had a large loss of income during the pandemic. Lots of ways to qualify. And if you do, we have more than 1,000 broadband providers all across the country who will, not all of them will be in every area, but there are many in every state, and they will offer you broadband service with discounts of up to $50 a month. And that number goes up to $75 on tribal lands. And some of the broadband providers also offer a discounted laptop or tablet computer. And in the very short time we've had this program up and running, we now have 5.7 million households who've been able to go online and participate. And it is, it's a really important program because it's the first time that we've recognized as a country that you don't solve the digital divide without addressing affordability. And now let me just sound a little bit like an advertisement, but you should go to www.fcc.gov/emergency broadband benefit. And here's why. We've got lots of details there. You can look state by state which broadband providers are there. You can learn how to apply. And even better, we have a toolkit with like all this well-drafted promotional material that you can cut and paste from. We've got materials in 13 languages. It is really designed for anyone who wants to help get the word out in their community to borrow these materials, use them however you see fit. Because I know that when I preach about this program here or elsewhere, you know, only so many ears will hear. And I know that when trusted actors in communities, like folks who help run Head Start, reach out and let people know about it, we're going to make sure that noise gets further and we're going to reach the people and the families who need it most.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. And we've really got a two-pronged effort right now in Head Start to publicize two major things. One is the child tax credit and the benefits that can provide to our families. So if they're non-filers, doing that. The other is the emergency broadband benefit, and recognizing that we are that trusted resource, and also the folks who are in front of families constantly, over 1 million families a year. I can't say enough about that trust. It is so important. Yeah. You start a new program in Washington with the government, trust doesn't naturally follow, but it's when individuals, people count on in their communities, speak about it, make note of it, offer materials on it. That's when we're really successful. And we've got Boys and Girls Clubs, Meals on Wheels working with us. We even got the NFL to do a public service announcement. Yes. We have been, anyone and everyone who wants to be able to help us get the word out, we've been inviting them in because we know we can't do it alone. Great. So let's go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is kind of that homework gap that I think you helped coin that term perhaps and has kind of entered a lot of public consciousness, especially during COVID. I'd say thankfully preschoolers don't do homework, right? They don't actually do that. So we've talked about some of the family benefits. We'd love because we're early childhood, right? To hear from you, we're not always viewed as like K-12, even though 20% of Head Start programs are in public schools and those are the grantees, et cetera. What do you think are the opportunities for early childhood around the FCC policies and the digital divide? How do we talk about ourselves, and how do we help this resonate with lawmakers and others who care about it? It's true that traditionally our programs have been K through 12 centric, right? We don't think about the younger years. Yeah. And this pandemic, I think, is going to have to make policymakers take a fresh look at that. Yeah.
On a professional level, the one thing that I hear from teachers, and I'm sure this applies to even in the preschool level.
Yeah.
Like, we came into this pandemic and we've got all of these virtual tools, and some of them are suboptimal. Some things work, some things don't work. But there's a level of collaboration and coordination that we've now experimented with on national scale. And there's some elements we will take with us out of this pandemic and when we get to the other side. Because some of this coordination and collaboration and ability to build community or strengthen the ties of community, they're powerful, and we should figure out how to make sure they continue. I mean, I'm again talking as the mother of older students, but when you can do the parent-teacher conference over a video, when it doesn't take two parents leaving their jobs early, driving across town to get there, huffing and puffing because they couldn't find parking. Sorry, just from personal experience.
Yep.
And showing up a little exasperated from it all.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. And there's no reason why we couldn't continue that. So there's some benefits in what our experimentation. We got to find the good stuff and continue that. And there's going to be things that didn't work too. We can leave those on the cutting room floor. But I think that there's some power in finding out how to use these tools, and it's different at different levels, but I see it as a tool that we're still going to use when we get to the other side.
That's great to hear. So every Head Start program has a policy council made up of parents. Parents help with governance, they help set the direction. And the number one thing we've heard from our folks is attendance at policy councils is way up. Because
of course, right? And by the way, this pandemic has also proven that for telehealth.
Yeah.
For low-income populations in particular, the no-shows have gone down. And is it any reason? It's just another version of what I just described. You got to get across town. You need bus fare. You need gas. You need to get out of your job early.
Absolutely.
And sometimes there's simplicity in a follow-up that just entails you sitting in your living room and, reasserting that you don't have certain problems. And again, these are the things from the pandemic that we should take with us to the other side. Not all of it, but these are things. And I think that they have distinct benefits for families who may lack income or lack time.
Yeah,
because both of those deficits are real in modern life, and they're the things that can make us miss some of the things that matter most.
Yeah, and I will share COVID, our community pivoted so dramatically during COVID. And I'll never forget the stories of, people using digital connectedness with families who were in lockdown at home to allay their concerns about COVID-19. And here's how you keep your kids safe. Here's how you keep yourself safe. And they were doing that digitally, right? Connecting.
And of course, you're trusted, so you can convey that information.
Yes, exactly.
In a way that an online search doesn't provide the same authority. I mean, you have a special relationship, and then you get to use it by sort of broadcasting into someone's home. There's power in that. And again, we should take these things with us as we exit this pandemic.
And we also want to take the Zoom sing-alongs because preschoolers love the sing-along. Now, okay, so we are done with our Q&A portion. We've got a few questions in the chat, and then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day as well. But we have a number of questions around net neutrality. And so Robert Wilson asks, are there any plans to address net neutrality concerns in regards to access to resource for our families? I'm concerned providers can further slow access to resources in favor of other commercial interests. So are you able to comment on that?
I support net neutrality. Vigorously oppose the last administration's efforts to roll back our nation's net neutrality rules. I think when you go online, you should be able to do what you want, say what you want without your broadband provider making choices for you. And so I recognize we need to bring those policies back, make them the law of the land once again. And that will hopefully happen not that far down the road. I don't have a majority at the agency who supports net neutrality at the moment, but I hope it's something that we can take on in the not too distant future, and even encourage Congress to think about looking at it again too.
Great, thank you. Well, that was our one question in the chat for now. I think we're getting another question in too. There have been many gains from introducing technology into Head Start and early Head Start. Virtual visits are stopping because the Office of Head Start is obviously, pivoting a lot of our work back to in-person services. So I think the question kind of builds on what you were saying too. How can we work with the Office of Head Start to promote the gains that we saw during virtual time without going back just to the status quo? How do we make that kind of change, do that kind of change advocacy? How can you advise us on that?
Oh my gosh. Listen, teachers, educators, preschool folks, they just turned on a dime, right? Like overnight,
Yeah.
we all suddenly became these IT gurus who were going to conduct our classes from like little square boxes. I mean, it's still astonishing to me what heroes these folks are. But I think that their work never ends because we probably have to all collectively look back and assess what worked and what didn't. I don't think as a technology expert, I'm going to have a real command on that at the FCC.
Yeah.
But I think that it's incumbent really on every school system and institution to say, this stuff was good, this stuff was not so good. So that you just have a kind of assessment of what worked and what didn't, and then you know how to use the good stuff going forward.
That's great. I mean, in Head Start, we're very data driven. So I feel like the playbook for us is to do that kind of analysis with our 1,600 programs, figure out what they want to continue, and then work with OHS to do that, as many communities are doing. But I think it's clear we can't just go back to the status quo. Things have changed and life has changed, and we need to roll with that too, while keeping in mind our North Star is what's best for kids and for families. I think we have time for one more question if you do, and we have one more in the chat. Do you see Head Start programs gaining increased access to E-rate in the future? And let's start with that one, and that may be enough to cover the next 3 minutes.
So the statute that E-rate operates under is from a law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Like, remember 1996? I had an AOL account a long time ago, right? I think we called the internet the information superhighway. And in that law, Congress contemplated that E-rate would support K through 12 service. So they weren't thinking about Head Start. I don't think they could have even imagined the power of the internet and connecting really young children in their classrooms. So the law we have is a function of the time it was developed. And while we've updated policies associated with it, we can't overwrite the law. That would be up to Congress.
Great. Well, it looks like we have our work cut out for us, and that's our work, right? To be on the Hill and to do that. Well, with that, I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your clear passion, your background, your expertise, and your views. And in the chat, please help me in thanking Chairwoman Rosenworcel. I give her a Head Start goodbye, as well as we did the Head Start welcome. Again, her Head Start programs are heroes. They've been on the front lines and pivoting and digitally, and want to take, like you said, take what was best from there and continue to support our families so that they can feel more connected and more included in the economy as well. So thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to staying in touch with you on these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you for what you do.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, that was a wonderful Q&A. Really exciting to hear from the acting chairwoman. And now I want to get to two other exciting guests that we have today who are going to lend their expertise to this conversation. So Belkis Torres is the Vice President of Early Head Start at the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade, Monroe Coalition in Florida. She's been a part of Head Start for nearly 30 years, 27 years. So congrats, Belkis, for that. She's directing the Early Head Start Child Care Partnership Program. And prior to that, she was with the Head Start program at Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Her passion for working with children led her to receive an undergraduate degree in child development with a specialization in child mental health, and later an advanced degree in curriculum instruction and instruction focused on the preschool years. Her concern for families living in communities with limited systems and resources drives her to desire to close the gap of inequity. And specifically to this conversation, she's been an outstanding member of what we call the Genius Team on the Digital Divide. She's been guiding NHSA's work and moving it forward with a group of other committed colleagues. So Belkis, welcome here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I want to introduce Lucas Pietrezek as well. And then I'll dig into the conversation with Belkis. Lucas manages member relations, external partnerships, and campaigns for an organization called Next Century Cities. And Lucas, feel free to drop the link in the chat as you see fit around your organization. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia, where he received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Media Policy and Ethics, and Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy, where he received a Master of Public Policy. His work includes developing relationships with partners across the country to elevate the work of Next Century Cities and local officials. He's always seeking out new and innovative ways to elevate member stories and bring local leaders together around connectivity. His subject matter expertise includes digital redlining, community broadband network, civic engagement, and much more. So Lucas, welcome here today as well.
Thank you so much.
Great. So Belkis, I want to start with you. Why don't you just tell us about your program first, so we can get to know the community you serve and what part of the country you're from and all of that.
So we're in Florida, in Miami, the southeast part of Florida. And our program actually came to the coalition in 2015. And many of you from Head Start will remember that during that time, the Head Start, the Office of Head Start released a solicitation or a funding opportunity for childcare partnerships. So Early Head Start would now have an opportunity to share its knowledge and the services that we give to the private sector. So the coalition applied at that time. It was the first time that they had ever ventured into an Early Head Start program, because they mainly dealt with our voluntary pre-K program here in Florida, as well as our subsidy for the children here in Florida, Miami-Dade. They're one of the coalitions in the state. So when they applied, we were awarded the grant. We were awarded 750 slots of infants and toddlers. And currently we're already on our second year project period, and we're actually entering the third year of that second year project period. We currently have 22 childcare partners from the private sector that offer the Early Head Start services alongside us. They do the education piece, we do the social services piece, and each of those centers are located in 13 high poverty areas or zip codes in our county. And just to give you an idea of how our county is made up, the majority of our county, about half of our county, is really Hispanic families. There is a large number of African-American families, and we also have a substantial amount of families that come from Haiti. So really, aside from English, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking families and a lot of Creole-speaking families. And when we looked at our community assessment, about half of those Spanish-speaking families are actually from poverty households. So we do have a lot of work ahead of us in our community.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, your community is definitely going to be facing the digital divide that we're talking about today. So some of your program, you've been working on the digital divide for both staff and for families. You've had an agency-wide focus and a program focus on parents. If you could talk our folks today on the call through what are those focus areas? What have you been doing? What are the outcomes you're driving toward? That'd be great.
So I have to say, before COVID, when I used to hear about digital divide, my whole thought went internet access and having a laptop or a computer. And after COVID, when we've kind of been thrust into the digital world, the divide has become more apparent in different aspects. So it's not just about having internet connection. It's not just about having a laptop. There are other things that we have come to find out. One is being knowledgeable about how to use all of the systems that are available to us in the internet and in the digital world. Even when you think about it, the language in the digital world is different from the language that we normally speak. So we've had to learn a lot of new words in the digital world that we probably were not familiar with prior to entering COVID. So it's training everybody on this language so that we're all talking the same language and understanding how to do it. The other thing has been cybersecurity. In our agency, and our Chief Information Officer, who actually happens to be with us today, Dr. Fred Hicks, he has done a phenomenal job in creating or making us aware of cybersecurity. He sends out the tests for us to see, are we aware this could be a potential attack on us? He does doomsday practices with us to ensure that if there is a cyber attack, how are we going to respond to it? He has also, we go through these trainings. They're actually a company called Know Before. It's kind of like a Netflix series in cyber world. So we get to learn about cyber attacks and how to protect ourselves and how to authenticate our access so that we stay safe. So this is done with the staff. And then the other thing that we've been doing is, and again, with the coalition, moving into the digital world started before COVID. So a few years back, they decided that applications were all going to be online. However, they understood that many of our families would probably not have access to digital devices or internet or so forth. So at every one of our offices, they created kiosks. So in our offices, we have kiosks for our families. And this is actually before I started with the coalition. So I've seen and learned a lot after starting with the coalition. But the kiosks are available to families. They have scanners available, so they have to scan information when they're applying. There is staff available if parents need guidance on how to use an equipment so that they can scan their own items. We also have access for guests. They have Wi-Fi, guest Wi-Fi, so the parents, they have access to it. So these are some of the ways that we make it easier for the families. Now, programmatically, we've also encountered, as I was saying, literacy and understanding how to use the digital world. So originally, we started with staff and parents using screenshots. So we would screenshot exactly the steps that they had to follow to access Zoom or to access any other application. But since then, we've started using video. So we created YouTube videos to help guide them. And originally, we actually went to YouTube and tried to find these videos so we wouldn't have to create it. The one thing that we confronted is that there is a digital gap with Spanish-speaking families or Creole-speaking families. And while the internet has access to a lot of videos and a lot of knowledge, having it in Spanish pales in comparison to the English. So we've had to create things, videos, so that we can cater to our Spanish-speaking families. So those have been some of the things that we have been doing to try to connect our families more digitally and get them to understand how to navigate the digital world.
It's wonderful because you're really broadening our scope of the understanding and applying both to staff, to families, to children, and the inclusion aspects are so important. And you even found inclusion gaps on eClick, right? For those on the call, and Lucas doesn't know, but that's the OHS site, which has just about 1 million videos on everything early childhood. Is that a place where you saw a need for inclusion too? Definitely.
A lot of our teachers too, and as well as our parents, their primary language may be Spanish, and while they may be able to speak English, they understand better if it's in their native language. And finding videos for parents has been very, very difficult for them to understand the information in their language. So yes, definitely, that's one place that I would love to see more bilingual information.
Okay, great. Thank you for that call to action. Well, I want to turn to Lucas now, and I'll bring you back into the conversation here later, Belkis. Lucas, you heard from the commissioner, chairwoman, I call commissioner acting chairwoman. Anything that particularly resonated with you there in her presentation, her dialogue, that resonates with your mission at Next Century Cities?
Absolutely. So for context, for those of you who have never heard of the organization before, we are based in DC, but I like to tell people 99% of our work happens outside of the Beltway. We're a coalition of, on last count, I think we're at 221 now, members from across the country. And our members are municipalities of every size, all the way up to as big as Los Angeles County, down to we have towns and villages of, between 3,000 and 10,000 people who are very small, tight-knit communities. And our members are their mayors, their city councilors, their town councils, their village presidents. And I think what I love most about the work we do, and something that touches on what the chairwoman said, was that they are trusted partners in their community in the same way you are. And she made a great point that new programs can come out of Washington and they can get the FCC's stamp of approval or Congress's stamp of approval, but it's still this new program that people don't really know about. The registration process may be complicated. As Belkis said, it may not be translated into the proper languages, and there can be glitches because when things are designed in DC, often they're designed in a vacuum. And I think the chairwoman made a phenomenal point in what you all can do as Head Start chapters and sort of officials and neighbors, your communities, is you can come forward and say, this is what we need. This is what's actually happening. And I always say, our members and our mayors, some of them are full-time mayors, some of them are part-time mayors, some are volunteers that this is just something extra they do on the side, but all of you are full-time neighbors. You're in your grocery stores, you're in your schools, your preschools, and you are our trusted resource. I serve on a small team in Washington and we do our best to get out into the country, but I sadly can't visit all 220 of our members every single day. So hearing from you all, knowing what sort of we need to be saying to the chairwoman, to the other commissioners, to members of Congress is amazing. And I think, with optimizing for mobile phones, the comment the chairwoman made about making sure these programs are set up like that from the start, we've seen issues like that where people couldn't fill out necessary documentation for school programs, but it's something that we would never know if someone hadn't talked to us, because sadly, the Washington, DC bubble that I'm sure all of you have heard about or have thoughts about, as I have many thoughts about it, we exist in a very connected city, and the people who are often leading these programs come from very connected positions. So I would encourage you all, as the chairwoman said, to continue to speak up and sort of bring forward the real stories. Kent said in my bio, I enjoy elevating member stories because there's nothing more powerful than hearing from a mayor directly who says, this is what my residents need.
Excellent. So help us understand more, because local advocacy is going to be big for Head Start, I think, in this area. I mean, the closer we are to the source, right, the more impact we're going to have on the digital divide issues here. So why or what avenues would traditionally a mayor or a city councilor or a town leader enter this conversation of digital divide? How would they be working on this, and why do they care?
Absolutely. So we across our network have, I like to say, the full spectrum of mayors who have arrived at this, or city councils that have arrived at this. We have some communities in Idaho and Louisiana who sort of came at this and said, we have no reliable providers, or we have no internet plans, offering internet under $75 a month, which for a large majority of Americans is not affordable at all. And they sort of sat down with their town council, with their residents, and they said, we're going to come at this and we're going to look at what does it look like if our city sets up and runs an affordable network. And they have been wildly successful. But one thing that we understood from the start when we were founded in 2014 is that simply isn't the story for every community. It's not the story for most communities. And every solution has to start local because we don't know what the needs and assets are. So a lot of our mayors are coming at this with little to no broadband knowledge. Often I will sit in meetings and we'll have to start with a very basic conversation of what is the digital divide? How big is it in my community? And I think that's the first place that you all can step in. The chairwoman made some comments, I think it was last year, when we were talking about broadband data mapping. And that's something that Congress has been talking about and the FCC has. And for a lot of communities, we don't have accurate data for who is connected, who's not, how much are people paying? And we have done work here in DC and our mayors have done work, but often simply coming forward, supporting your community, putting out a survey, or asking your neighbors, going door to door to figure out what does the landscape look like here, is sort of that first local advocacy thing. Because once a local government understands how big the problem is or how pressing it is, it's going to feel more timely and urgent. And the communities with the best data we've seen are the ones who are often the most successful, because they can be very targeted in their solutions and can, at the end of the day, politics and money drive this conversation. They can spend their money most efficiently and convince their communities to spend wisely and solve the digital divide at least as much as possible. So I would say to start there is to support that data gathering and make sure it's accurate and sort of really is painting a proper picture.
That's fantastic. And that's the kind of, we can do that, right? We have the data, we can build data, and we have stories too of why this matters. One thing that struck me when we were planning the call too is, and to illuminate again for our audience, some city officials are going to come and really focus on, well, we have these assets, right? We have a downtown business district, but the other thing we talked about are, libraries and public schools, right? So of course they care about them being connected and having broadband access and all sorts of support there. So can you tell us a little bit, I think as a case study, if you could tell us more about how these local officials interact with schools in particular, and maybe that could help us teach us how to help them relate to Head Start, which may be more likely is going to be in a community-based setting than a school.
Absolutely. I think, the chairwoman touched on this when she was talking, and I know you all, part of your big mission is serving the whole child. And obviously, Chairwoman Rosenworcel made the sad fact that the Telecommunications Act of '96, which I will date myself for a second. I was born in '97, so it was written even before I was alive. Obviously, the internet has changed a lot in 25 years. Obviously, that may exclude non-K-12 right now. But I think she hit right on it. And it's something that we at Next Century Cities, when we've pushed the FCC for the Emergency Connectivity Fund that's coming out and the Emergency Broadband Benefit, is recognizing that organizations like Head Start serve a crucial role in supporting younger siblings that may not be in K-12 yet. I know my older brother and I are the product of phenomenal preschool programs that set us up for success, and also supporting the parents. We understood and sort of saw this year that in order for students to do things virtually, their parents have to be able to stay home with them. Doctor's appointments have to happen. As the chairwoman said, parent-teacher conferences have to happen. And there are sort of all of these things that happen outside of a K-12 student signing on and sitting in class. And there are also sort of the non-curricular learning that kids do at home. Things that all of us sort of were able to do in preschool or in daycare or at the rec center that we simply can't do anymore. And we hope that it returns, but each and every day we sort of have to ask ourselves how much longer before we get back to normal or sort of progress to what's next. And I think that's where you all come into play, that the development of sort of early childhood education, it's so much more than just the physical classroom. And I know we've pushed the FCC to expand the flexibility that libraries can have and that schools can have. And an organization that we've partnered with, the Siegel Family Endowment, actually put out a paper last year, and I'm happy to share the link here in a second, of reimagining digital infrastructure. And they used a library, and they said a library may be a piece of physical infrastructure for a community, but what is the social infrastructure in that library? What is the digital infrastructure? And sort of how are they all coming together in this new technology age to support a community? Because nothing exists in a vacuum. And I think, again, that's sort of the biggest point that I carry out to our members, that here, when policy is written, sometimes it's very tunnel vision of we need to fund this program and plan this program by itself. But I think you all can bring those stories in that full picture. And you can make sure that people in DC, in your state capital, on your city council, don't forget that nothing exists in a vacuum when it comes to early childhood education or the digital divide or the homework gap, that all of these things are intertwined in a way that we've seen play out this year. And you all, as you continue to underscore it, can only drive policy forward.
Great, thank you for that. And one other asset in communities I forgot to mention, and just for our audience's benefit, is public housing, right? And so I know some cities and counties and et cetera have taken up connectivity to public housing. That may include a fair share of Head Start families. And so that's something for folks to be aware of as they engage in local advocacy too. So Lucas, one last question to you, and then I'll jump back in with Belkis is, emergency broadband benefit, anything more you want to say on the EBB, but also the Emergency Connectivity Fund? Really would welcome just kind of a catch-all opportunity here to mention advocacy opportunities that you think are, or programs you think our community should be engaged with.
Definitely. So I would say we have a resource on our website, and I'll send the link in just a second, of ways that communities have promoted the EBB across the country. And I just sent the link to a resource page that we built explaining exactly that. But I think what we've recognized is, whether it's for Pell Grant recipients or students who are participating in free and reduced lunch, or sort of the other eligibility groups, is reaching out to them directly oftentimes makes them aware of a program they just simply didn't know existed. And we face this difficult position where programs like Lifeline, which you all may know about, or E-Rate, they've been around, but there's nobody at the federal level who is doing promotion for them, because that responsibility doesn't fall to any agency. And the FCC has stepped up with the emergency broadband benefit, and a lot of organizations have really sort of taken up the torch and said, we're going to get enrollment up as high as we can. But I was telling Kent last week, I think we're at maybe 20% of eligible people have registered for the EBB. So we're missing, 4/5 of our country that could be benefiting from this program. And it's a program that, obviously when the $3 billion runs out, it will end, but we've seen in the infrastructure bill and are hopeful that the new $30 a month program will become permanent if the infrastructure bill passes and is signed by the president. But again, it's going to take all of us, pushing out that this exists and that this money is there, and making sure that people have access to the website or the phone number to register. I think a lot of people just simply don't know it's there, or don't think that the process is worth it. But everything we can do to inform them of that gets them online, and then just sets them up as we take the next steps, like Belkis was saying, to teach them the digital literacy they need, and sort of make sure that not only do they have the money, but they know where to get devices, they know how to get online, what to do once they're online. And I think if you all sort of look at what some of these communities have been doing, every chance that you can just tell one person that the EBB exists is a win, because that's now an entire family that can get online. And we're pushing here in DC for the Emergency Connectivity Fund to make it as flexible as possible. And our hope is that schools and libraries can partner with groups like Head Start to spend that money wisely and have the biggest impact possible.
Well, we support that. And for those who don't know, the Emergency Connectivity Fund works through institutions like schools and libraries to expand device access and other support. So it's really using the trusted institution as the intermediary. We have been on Capitol Hill, for our audience to know, advocating that include Head Start programs. We think there's a really strong case there, but love that you're advocating for flexibility that might take care of that too. So I think that's wonderful as well. I want to bring Belkis back in, and Belkis, I know we talked on our planning call, like what's next, for your program. So what's next for you guys around the digital divide? What do you hope to do on this issue next?
So little by little, we've been creating certain things. For one, we've been creating a parent portal, so that our early Head Start parents can apply for the program. And the way, and it's funny that there's been conversation about making sure that they can use it on their phones, because that's one of the things that we actually talked about with the IT department that's creating this for us. And they are going to make it accessible. So if parents want to apply, they can use a tablet version of it, a phone version of it, and still be able to easily apply for the program. So it's a secure way too for our families to upload, because again, there is so much emphasis in our organization about security and confidentiality of information. This will secure that they can upload birth certificates, and it can be taking a picture of it. It doesn't have to be that they have to have a scanner. So we're really keeping in mind all of the challenges that our families would face, given the fact that the coalition itself serves over 50,000 children in early childhood. So there have been a lot of befores in learning this process and what are the challenges with our families. So we keep that in mind in early Head Start, and we have that foundation or that history that helps us try to create something better. So one is creating a location where parents could apply easily and securely for our program. We've also just purchased tablets for all of our teachers so that they are able to do their assessments, so that they're able to plan their lessons with the children, and that, I apologize for that, and that they're able to do it in an easy way. Also, we want to use it for coaching. Right now, we're not allowed in the classroom, but we still need to continue monitoring and coaching the teachers. So these tablets will allow us to see as much in the natural setting as possible what's going on, so that we can effectively guide the teachers. So those are some of the things that we are currently working on. We also do want to create our own coaching platform. We have seen some of the coaching platforms that are out there, but we want something that's more flexible, that we have more control over, to make it easier for teachers, and if needed, in other platforms for families as well.
Great, thank you so much, and excited to see what y'all do. And it's incredible that the coalition serves 50,000 children. I'm just blown away by that. And what an opportunity to change lives for the better. So thank you so much. Lucas, I'll ask you, give you an opportunity to give any closing comments, but also, I think we also touched in our planning call, for a city or a county or what have you to join Next Century Cities, they basically write a letter right from the chief executive or whatnot, understanding it's really going to take the commitment of that, party or individual. Would you encourage our members to reach out and say, hey, there's this great organization, Century Cities, and Head Start is aligned with their views? Is that something you would encourage, or maybe different pathways toward that?
Absolutely encourage it. I take every opportunity I can to tell local communities to join. We're a free network, which is probably the most important part. And we try to do what you all, I think, are already sort of implementing a phenomenal model of, and that's to connect communities from across the country. I think Head Start is one of the best examples of you all coming together and sharing your stories and your techniques. And we try to do that with our mayors. I just sent a link to our Become a Member page.
Okay.
Like Kent said, it's simply an email to me, and I will be sure to share my email that says, hi, we want to join, because we are working on broadband. We're curious about broadband, digital inclusion, what have you. And we have a number of resources on our website, even for you all to use, for non-members to use, that we try to support people just as much as we can, because we know that a lot of this is simply people need the information and the knowledge on what's going on and what they need to do. So we support everyone joining and coordinating with them, even with non-municipal partners like you all. And I also, a closing thought, as the son of an educator, want to say, you all are doing phenomenal work. I know how hard you all work, and that none of this could be happening without you. Without, organizations on the ground and advocates on the ground, DC would be pointless. So keep up your hard work, because you're the ones actually enacting the real change on the ground that's making a difference.
Great, 3 cheers for that. Thank you. Belkis, any closing thoughts for our folks, calls to action, points you want to emphasize?
Well, there is one call to action, I think, after listening to the conversations, and something that Lucas mentioned about, when he goes out, people really don't understand how much the digital divide. I think I would love to have a toolkit just to know the depth of the digital divide in our community. So it would be great if we can have a toolkit that would give us that information, so that we can really look at how can we make a change in our programs and in our communities.
That's great. We are working on that, I'm happy to say, and you will probably be part of finishing that and reviewing it for me because of your expertise and your work on the Genius team. The other thing I came across recently is great, easy surveys you can use with your parents and your families to know what are the challenges, barriers you're facing digitally? What are the concerns you have? What are your hopes and aspirations? So look for more on that. That really will help at the program level. So thank you both for being here today. Thank you for your incredible expertise and your thoughts today, and for moving this newish conversation forward for the Head Start community. Lucas, we really appreciate it, and all Next Century City does. And Belkis, we love elevating the work of our Head Start and early Head Start leaders. So thank you for being here. And again, in the chat, please give them a Head Start thank you. Please go ahead and do that, especially Lucas, who's a guest here. And also fill out our end of session review. If you like this session, want to see more stuff like that, give it a good review and we'll increase our odds of having it in the future. So with that, thank you all and have a great rest of your Fall Leadership Institute. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.